So, Krystal,
Yes.
why don't you go ahead and tell me a little bit about this new round of COVID misinformation that we're seeing?
Yes, well, you flagged this. So let's throw Kyle's tweet up on the screen here. Axios, leave this up for a minute because I'm going to explain this. So Axios put out this piece that says a new preprint study found the Pfizer vaccine was only 42% effective against infection in July when Delta was dominant. Study has grabbed the admin's attention. If that's not a wake-up call, I don't know what is, a senior Biden official told me. So leading with the most, you can continue to leave this up on the screen, leading with the most scaremongering part of this study you possibly could get. As you point out, however, the study is, number one, not peer-reviewed. Number two, if you read the article, it says, oh, lo and behold, Moderna's vaccine was 92% effective against hospitalization and Pfizer's was 85%. And also from the article, no data so far has found either vaccine's protection against severe disease and death is significantly less against Delta. So this is a consistent pattern that we're seeing. Liberal media knows what their audience, what's going to freak out their audience, the type of information that's going to titillate and scare the crap out of them. And so they are leaning into scaremongering, putting out what is really misleading, if not actual misinformation about the vaccines and how effective they actually are for clicks. And by the way, when you do that, when you are consistently saying the vaccines don't work, guess what? You're also fueling vaccine hesitancy, because why would you get a vaccine and have to deal with like the couple days of symptoms or taking time off of work or whatever it requires to get that vaccine if you're consistently being told by supposedly credible sources that this thing doesn't work all that well anyway?
Yeah, this is something that's annoyed me for a very long time. And now, as you see, it's just gotten worse and worse.
Yeah.
When you are citing how effective a vaccine is, there are a lot of experts who argue this, but nobody in the media seems to agree, that really the only number that makes sense is to cite how much does it protect you against hospitalization, severe illness, and death.
Yes.
Because that's what people really want to know. Am I going to get really sick or am I going to die?
Yeah, people aren't terrified of getting a cold.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
But what they do is, so that 42% number, that's exactly what you just said. That includes people who get COVID but are asymptomatic, and includes people who get COVID and have the sniffles. And it's like, that's just wildly misleading, and it is totally sensationalist. They just want the clicks, they just want the eyeballs. And the sad thing is, Krystal, I forget what the number is, but it's some preposterously high percentage of people who only read the headline.
Yes.
When it comes, and by the way, I'm also guilty of
I know
that many times, you know, like it's just part, you know, you're busy, you got stuff you got to do, you scroll through, sometimes you just see something and move on and you just take it at face value. But the last thing you should do is take it at face value. And actually, one of the best pieces I've seen on this, and this isn't an outlet I usually give a lot of credit to, it's not my favorite outlet, but
okay.
Vox actually produced a segment on this a while ago that I thought was phenomenal, because they explained in detail how those numbers came about. There was a governor, I forget where the governor was, but this governor said, or may have been a mayor, said, we're not going to accept the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. And everybody's like, wait, why? Why wouldn't you accept the Johnson & Johnson vaccine? He goes, it's only 66% effective, or whatever the number is.
Yeah, I think it was a mayor in Florida, is my recollection.
And we care about our people, so I don't want to give them something that's not good enough.
Yeah.
Well, come to find out, as soon as the expert sat down with him and explained to him what that really meant, that actually this vaccine is just as effective as the other vaccines, and it's still over 95% effective against hospitalization and death. And when they did the studies, it was at different times in the pandemic. So they tested the Johnson & Johnson, I believe it was in Brazil, during the peak of COVID for them, during one of the waves, and it was a new variant. They said, basically, it looks like if we had tested all of these at the exact same time in the pandemic, then we would have gotten the exact same results with all of them, which is why the Johnson & Johnson was approved alongside the Pfizer and the Moderna. And as soon as the actual science and the real information was explained to this person, and it wasn't just sensationalist headlines, he immediately flipped and came out and said, I was wrong, and we're going to accept all the different vaccines.
Yeah.
So, but this is what I'm talking about. This is the level that we're dealing with. We're dealing with a media that is sensationalist, that is misleading, and it really does a lot of damage in the real world, because to your point, if you see that headline and it says now it's only 42% effective against the new Delta variant, I would look at that, and if I thought that was true, I'd be like, why would I get the vaccine?
Yeah.
It doesn't even work.
Right, exactly. It doesn't even work anymore, so why would I bother with that? And they're doing profound damage, even as they claim to care so much about protecting people and people getting vaccinated and all of that. The other person who has been consistently pretty good on these issues is Nate Silver, and we can put his tweet up on the screen because he's flagging another instance of media misinformation on COVID in the same direction. So there was a leaked CDC document that emphasized this notion that the Delta variant is as contagious as chickenpox. Chickenpox is famously extremely contagious, one of the most contagious things that we know about that's out there. And so that sounds really, really scary. And you're like, oh my God, this thing is as infectious and contagious as chickenpox. Well, that's not true. That's just not true. This leaked CDC document was inaccurate. The media didn't fact check it. They just ran with it. They framed it in the scariest possible light. Now look, Delta is very contagious. You can see there the numbers if we leave that up on the screen. Chickenpox, they say how does this work? It's like for every so many people that you're in a room with, you're gonna infect 10 people. And for COVID-19, it's 7 people. So that's still a high number. It's still fairly contagious and more so than the original strain, which is at 3 people for this R naught metric that they use. But it is not, in fact, as contagious as chickenpox. And so, again, this was extremely misleading. There were other conclusions and other scaremongering reports that were written up based on this one study. And what he points out, if you read down in this thread, is he's saying, I really want to know how and why this document was leaked, because people have certain interests within the administration or certain, they may have wanted to justify the fact that they turned on a dime on the mask, on their, mask requirements and where they were there. There may have been a minority view within the CDC that wanted to prove their point and get it out there with the public. So it's always important to keep in mind that even when you're dealing with the CDC or public health officials, they have their own incentives and interest to spin a narrative or convince the public of something that may or may not be true. And consistently, from the beginning of this thing, the media has been very unskeptical about any claims that have been made. You saw this with, the lab leak hypothesis and what was being fed to them in that. And they also have their own incentive to take whatever piece of information they have and make it as scary as they possibly can, even when it results in what is patent misinformation in this case.
Yeah, with the media, we can't overestimate they're just not, a lot of these people are just not experts in the field. Now, that's also coming from a non-expert myself, but I will admit to you up front, I am not an expert, and I'm giving my opinion, and you should definitely try to, whatever I'm saying, you should check it up against what other experts are saying, and sometimes experts disagree with each other, so that's where you have to rely as much as you can on your own independent judgment. But you get the sense that they will very often in the media lean towards whichever thing sounds more hyperbolic and more sensationalist. And it's a real shame. And you made a great point recently about long COVID and about the way it's been reported with how it affects kids, where there was this fear-mongering. Was it a New York Times story? It was a very fear-mongering story about long COVID in kids. And then when you actually look at the data, they were really overhyping what the problem was. And it's the mirror image, because now COVID has in some ways become a culture war issue. It's now the mirror image of the people on the right who try to downplay it at every turn. There are many people in liberal elites who try to play it up at every turn.
Yes.
And that's, again, why you see the thing about even when people are vaccinated and breakthrough cases are so small, it's like, well, everybody still wear a mask anyway. And it's like, well, maybe, but at the same time, don't overhype and talk about how necessary that is when it's really not nearly as necessary as unvaccinated people wearing the mask.
And they go way beyond, the thing with long COVID is they go way beyond where the science actually is.
Yes, right.
There hasn't been a proven causal link between these lingering symptoms. There are some questions about whether this is truly a result of coronavirus. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. It just hasn't been proven out yet. So to take these few instances of extreme cases and then to show you some numbers, sort of cherry pick the numbers to convince you that, oh, this is a typical sequence of events. This is typical of what might happen to your kid too. It's just really irresponsible. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching.
That's right. Just as a reminder, you can become a premium subscriber today. Watch the full show completely uncut, our reactions to each other's monologues. You get to listen to it, you get to ask us questions, all that good stuff. Link is right there in the description or at breakingpoints.com.
Best of all, great way to say screw you to the mainstream media.